everybody, and welcome to the second day of the Nutrient Management webinar series. I'm Matthew Wells, Rural Extension Specialist with Lethbridge County, and I'll be your host for the upcoming presentations. Some general housekeeping before we begin. Each webinar will be recorded. Once the series has concluded, the recordings will be posted on the Lethbridge County YouTube channel and the Lethbridge County website. A link to the recordings will be sent out to all participants in case you'd like to review the sessions or were unable to participate in one or more of the presentations. This year, the series is also being presented on Rogers TV here in Lethbridge, which is exciting. Any questions that you have can be typed in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen and will be answered once both presentations have been completed. Please feel free to utilize the chat box just to get a general sense of where everyone is from. If you wouldn't mind posting what town, province, and state you're in the chat, that would be greatly appreciated. We do have CEU credits available for each presentation. QR codes will be shown at the end of the session today. All you'll need is the Certified Crop Advisor app to scan to receive credits for today's presentations. If anyone has any trouble, just send me a chat or an email and I'll help you as best as I can. Lastly, the webinar is scheduled for 1 hour each day. We will certainly extend it if we need to accommodate for questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panelist today, Trevor Wallace, who will discuss nutrient management planning more than calculating application rates. Trevor has been working in the agricultural sector for over 25 years, including extension and research in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and the Maritimes. Currently, he's a provincial nutrient management specialist with Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation based out of Leduc. His role includes an extension research, and policy development responsibilities. Trevor worked with a variety of stakeholders to develop and implement programs that support a sustainable agriculture sector. Trevor graduated from the University of Saskatchewan with a Bachelor of Science in Biology, a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, and later completed his Master of Science in Agriculture, in addition to a certificate in adult education from the University of Alberta. Welcome, Trevor.
Thanks very much for having me. I just share a screen here and you can let me know if it's working and if the sound's okay.
Good and good.
Excellent. Well, thanks. I'm very excited to be here. Looks like we're having a great turnout today. So I wanted to talk about nutrient management planning. There's been a lot of people asking me questions about it more recently, like the details about nutrient management planning, the steps in nutrient management planning. And so just wanted to go through some of the things in nutrient management planning. And like I said in the title, to me, it's a little bit more than just coming up with an application rate, be it fertilizer or manure application rate. I think there's many parts of nutrient management planning that provide you additional information. All of it can be used for nutrient management planning, for coming up with application rates, but it can go beyond that. And I'm really going to focus a lot on optimizing, using the word optimizing today, optimizing that production rather than maximizing. And optimizing to me includes, a very strong economic presence in the decision making. So what is nutrient management planning? For anybody that hasn't been familiar with it, again, I want to talk about optimizing the production system. And that's sort of evaluating a yield potential, maximizing the benefits of the manure or fertilizer that we do apply. I'm just going to do one thing. I'm just going to turn my video off for a second, if I can. Well, it's working okay right now, right, Matt?
Yeah, no, you're working good.
Okay. Anyway, so sort of managing those nutrients, being really efficient with our nutrients for whatever we apply, whatever we invest into that production system, and identifying the risks, not only risks of nutrient loss, but risks to the crop, risk of crop loss, anything that's going to take away from that yield. And I intentionally put this barrel up as just an image, just to discuss it. It's sort of a law of the minimum, which looks at all of the nutrients and factors a crop needs to grow. And in this example, you can see air and light really at the top of the, just put the pointer on, top of the barrel. Again, lots of air and light, and everything else, it's sort of different in degrees, whether there's enough heat units or enough water, which is often a big one. But then we get down to the micro and macronutrients, and any one of those missing is going to limit growth of the crop. So in the case of water, which, coming out of a dry year and anticipating a coming dry year, it doesn't matter how much more we invest in nutrients, that limiting factor is going to be water. So productivity, potential, that's where the limiting bar is going to be. In this picture, it happens to be nitrogen. So nitrogen's the lowest slot in this barrel, and therefore anything else we invest into it, nothing's going to get above where the nitrogen limitation is. So I do say a lot about optimizing crop yield, and that is really where we look at the economics. And this example is just, it's showing yield. And as we invest in more fertilizer, in this case, it happens to be nitrogen along the bottom, as we invest in more, we can get yield to go up and go up and up. And eventually, like, we can get to a maximum yield where the potential for the crop is. The question is the difference, is this yield economical? Is that the best investment of funds? Or is an optimum yield, which might be here, investing worth 100 pounds of nitrogen instead of 130? We often look, using some of our tools, at a 2-to-1 investment. So for every $2 I want to invest in the crop, for every dollar I want to invest in the crop, I want a $2 return. This might be $1 investment, $1 return. Optimum might be that 2-to-1. So I want a $2 return on every dollar investment. So like I said, the whole discussion, or for my session here specifically, I want to discuss the economics being a fundamental part of this. And of course, from a nutrient management point of view, we often look at other assessing potential and assessing risk within the system. And it's not just a risk of loss, but it's a risk to crop productivity, be that disease, infection, or it could be pH in the soils that are reducing the potential of my crop. So in my mind, nutrient management planning is a little bit more than just coming up with an application rate. And of course, fundamentally, it's evaluating the options. What options are out there for my production system, for this field? What's the best choices I can make to optimize the potential that I can get out of it? And if I go on and somebody asks me, like, the process, and it's sort of cyclical in the sense that you sort of start with a field, you might move through a crop. You don't have to start with the whole farm. You don't have to start with the whole rotation. Yeah, you can start with a field and move through it, eventually doing the whole farm. Once all the work is done for that initial evaluation or plan, then we sort of continue maintenance, continue tweaking, as it will improve, because the information we generate and get improves as we keep going through the system. So the components of nutrient management planning, first off, soil analysis. This is, determining what the soil needs, but also what the soil's limitations are with respect to crop production. The crop and rotation. What are my goals? What am I trying to achieve? What am I trying to grow? Of course, field assessment, and this is where we're going to look at the field. It's connected to, but slightly separate than a soil sample. When we're assessing the soil of a field, of course, we're still assessing that field, but the field assessment itself, we're going to be looking at topography, location, other restrictions that might affect us, that make us refine what we need or change the crop we want to grow. Biggest limitation on a farm is the equipment and staff, enough people, enough time in the day to be able to do what we want to do in the landscape. Finally, the nutrient sources. What are my options? Obviously, we're limited to what might be available at the closest fertilizer plant or dealer, but you may have manure as an option. You may have something from neighbors or field practices that you use, be it cover crops or green manure crops. Like, where am I getting my nutrients from? Of course, in-crop monitoring, trying to address issues as they come on from a production perspective. And of course, at the end, yield mapping, looking at what we've been growing, evaluating our plan, and seeing what needs to be tweaked in the future. I firmly believe all of this is rooted in economics. We make our decision not just to maximize the tonnage that goes in a bin, but to make sure it's the most economically put in the bin, that we make the most profit or benefit from. And of course, all of this is completely impacted by weather and sometimes undermines all of our decisions. And that's one of the considerations when you start talking about nutrient management planning, is we know weather's going to happen. We know there's going to be situations or circumstances, be it insects, pests, or weather extremes that we have to manage. Having a plan, or at least thinking your way through a plan, thinking of those contingencies allows you to respond to them a lot faster than if you haven't considered them prior to the event happening. So pieces of nutrient management plan, I just want to go into a few key pieces of information. The most I want to spend is on soil analysis, and I'll try to be brief. So our first step is really looking at that soil, what's in there. A lot of people often ask, well, how do you get a good soil sample? The best is getting a representative sample of the field. That's sort of hard to do at times. The field, the topography, the past history, and of course the farmers' experiences are probably the most important pieces of information to decide how best to sample this area. This is just an illustration. Many of our fields may have been smaller fields in the past. There may have been fence lines, manure storage sites. Even a lot of our fields have different soil within the field itself. Knowing this information helps you collect the best soil sample possible. There's several different strategies to doing that. I wasn't going to go into detail on them, but that's how we get a better understanding of here. And then, the more we grow a crop on here, we can actually segregate out areas that are acting differently and sample them differently so that we can manage them differently. Biggest thing on soil sampling, 20-25 samples per field. Getting more isn't probably going to provide a lot more information. I like to see depth 0 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 to 24, a combination of. This gives you an idea profile. I wouldn't suggest this is done every year. We can manage those deeper depths, but every 3 years. But the only reason that we like to go deeper depths, nitrogen and sulfur are deeper. Our roots access them. It goes into that calculation of nutrients. It tells us sort of what's being influenced by upward movement of groundwater and a few other factors. Some of our programs estimate nutrient availability in the lower depths, even if you don't have them. So knowing that is beneficial. And the value comes from sampling over time. Ideally using the same lab, definitely using the exact same procedures so that the numbers you're comparing are relative to each other. One of the first things in a soil sample we like to see is that soil texture. That's the percentage of clay and sand mixed in. In this analysis, it's just over here under loam. This has your sample with loam. Why do we care about soil texture? Sort of gives that water infiltration rate. Soil particles are charged and hold cations to them. That's a positively charged nutrients, and we have cations in the soil and the clay and organic matter are two of the soil's features that help hold them. So it gives us an idea of nutrient holding capability. Often you see that percentages, we use a triangle, depending on the amount of clay and the amount of sand in it. It's sort of where you drop in that triangle is the texture of that soil. This can be done by a particle size analysis or by hand. And like I said, it really affects that water holding capacity, that infiltration rate. It affects soil fertility. So it's a big one. When it comes to working equipment, soil texture has an impact on how much drag there is on the equipment. So it's a very key piece of information. The other one is probably a little less well understood, but it's equally, if not more important, is the organic matter in the soil. And that's the fraction of the soil that contains, plant and animal tissue of various stages of breakdown. It's generally not the material from last year's harvest that's on the ground. That's organic material. Organic matter has it's been decomposed till it gets to a humus material. Or organic material really breaks down really quickly. So there is a difference in that. Our soils, at least in Alberta, we sort of use a book value. For every 1% organic matter, you get about 10 pounds of nitrogen in it. But organic matter really is an indicator can indicate soil health. An increase in soil organic matter from 1 to 3% can reduce the soil's erodibility by 20 to 30%. So information, it does tell you or give you an idea of nutrient release, and it helps from a nutrient management planning point of view, but it also tells you soil health. It can also give you an indication of risk of erosion for that site, which can influence the crops and choices you make when it comes to farming that land if you want to increase the soil organic matter. if you want to reduce the erodibility of the soils. It affects CEC. It is one of the key factors that we do really want to look at. And I've mentioned CEC a couple of times. I don't want to go into detail, but it's just the ability of the soil to hold cations. And the cations, calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, plants absorb these from the soil solution around the particles and organic matter. And the negative charges on the clay or on the organic matter are what holds them and releases them into soil solution for plants to absorb. So a cation exchange capacity of like 1 to 10 usually suggests a high sand content, low organic matter, low water holding capacity. Potassium might be more likely to leach out of it, but less lime is needed to increase the pH. A higher CEC, higher clay content, higher capacity to hold nutrients and prevent that downward movement and that loss as it goes down into the soil. It's really a chemical feature, but I left it up there with the organic matter and soil texture because they're really related. Other soil properties that we often look for, we should always looking for, things like pH and nutrients. That pH is really a measure of the relative amount of free hydrogen in the soil. Neutral soils are near a pH of 7. We can see that 6.773, so 6.773. Anything with a smaller number means more acidic. Anything with a larger number is alkali. A couple of comments on this. It's sort of the hydrogen items in that solution. So in this image, I'm just showing soil particles and the root, and then there's air and water, and that air and water is the soil solution. That's where we're getting our hydrogen ions from to determine our pH. pH affects microorganisms. It affects crop growth. It affects nutrient availability. So it's a big driver in how the soil reacts to crop growth. And it's not a simple scale. pH of 6 is 10 times more acidic than a pH of 7. And a pH of 5 is 100 times more acidic than a pH of 7. So it affects a lot of the chemical, physical, and biological properties of soil. So it's a very more important factor. We use it a lot to determine nutrient application rates, but we can also use this information to decide on cropping and rotational practices or liming practices, management practices. pH indicates whether the soil is acidic or not. It does not tell us how much lime we need to address that pH. That would be buffer pH, which measures the reserve acidity and determines the effectiveness of liming material. So that's a different test. So pH tells us how acidic it is, but buffer pH or lime test would tell us how much we need to change this pH by 1 point or 2 points, whatever we're aiming for. Now, I did mention this briefly, and this is just pH range along the top. More acidic, you see some nutrients like iron, for example, get more available with lower pH, and here you see calcium get more available with higher pH, which affects other nutrients. So you can see aluminum gets more available at lower pH, and this results in aluminum toxicity affecting plant growth, significantly affecting plant growth. We also get manganese toxicity at these levels. And then we get interaction between different nutrients, whereas phosphorus available to crop would be in this ideal area, but as pH goes down, it will bind with aluminum and become less available to plants. As it goes up, it binds with calcium, again, less available to plants. So, well, in this example, pH is really telling us where our nutrient levels are. So where they are more available or less available, and considerations on changing that pH if desired to improve nutrient availability. One thing I mentioned earlier, there's a huge impact on crop growth. Most of our crops are very happy between pH of 6 and 7, maybe 5.5 and 7, like our barleys, canolas in the same range, oats and wheat. So they're okay. As it gets acidic, we're going to see reductions in yield. The same with as we see 2-alkali, you're going to see reductions in yield. The acidity is really to do with soluble aluminum and manganese, which is toxic to the roots and affects phosphorus uptake. But we can see down here, potatoes, white potatoes, very happy with that lower pH range. So knowing the pH of the soil or that field can give us a couple of options, either changing the rotation to be more adapted to that pH, or looking at liming as a way to adjust that pH to be within the range we want for the crop we want. One thing I did want to briefly mention, fertilizer and soil pH. Soil acidification is a natural process. Nitrogen is the main nutrient that can affect pH. Nitrogen fertilizers, nitrate-based products are least acidifying. Ammonium-based products have a greater potential acidify. And again, that's the fertilizer coming into the soil solution, releasing hydrogen ions, and then again, driving that pH down, making it more acidic. Some fertilizers we can add can absorb hydrogen, and that makes it more alkali. Anhydrous ammonia, for example, can cause a rise in pH to a more alkali condition. Phosphorus, not really as significant of an impact. Potassium, little or no effect. Compost is a little of effect. Manure can have a more of a positive effect or increase the alkalinity of the soil. And it's really just that release of nutrients. It's really that hydrogen ion into the solution that's resulting in, well, okay. Moving on, another factor that we're looking at is soil acidification. And I'm sorry, but my mouse is not working properly. So yeah, we'll work it out. Yeah, when we do a soil sample, we can look at the soluble salts. Soluble salts, again, poor structure, affects plant growth, affects nutrient uptake. It really affects water uptake, interferes with infiltration and a crop growth. And I just happened to put on a table showing, what we consider non-saline is less than 2 decisiemens weekly, 2 to 4. What does that mean from a crop growth point of view? You can see around 2 decisiemens right here impact on crop growth as it starts to go up. The EC, this is the salinity starts to increase, and therefore the electrical conductivity number is getting higher. You can see a really drop. Flax drops off quite quickly, followed by canola, wheat, barley, alfalfa. Then we get fescue and tall wheatgrass. So again, we adjust our fertilizer recommendations because of this, but at the same time, we can make decisions on which crops we use to better grow in that field. Is it the most appropriate rotation for that field? Nutrients, one thing I just wanted to mention on nutrients, most people, the nutrients, when we go and do a soil sample, we use various chemicals, or the labs, use various chemicals to extract a nutrient. And so it's not an absolute number that they get. They're really getting an index of a relative availability. So many different chemicals have been used over time, and then those extractants and those tests need to be tested in the field to see if, and calibrate them, to see if they're relevant for your area. So the extractant really pulls out those easily available nutrients, or those ones that are easily exchangeable from the cation, like the potassium and calcium, but it's an index of relative availability. So we use the extract to bring out the nutrient, but to be of value, then that needs to be tested in the field to make sure that it is representing what's happening in the soil here, based on the environment and general nutrient availability that happens. So it needs to be calibrated. And here I just wanted to show you really quickly, a calibration test. So this happens to be one of the ones that Alberta Agriculture has done years ago. So soil samples, this top line is soil samples with 0 to 6 parts per million of phosphorus. And this is a soil sample with parts per million 13 to 19, taken to the field and additional phosphorus applied to see what the response was to them, to show that this low level suggests a higher level of fertilizer recommendation. So there's a number of different methods. I put some phosphorus ones here, just an example. There's been a lot of tests with phosphorus, modified canola here. Miller Axley, we used to use in Alberta years ago. It was really not suited for calcareous soils. Bray 1, calcareous soils sort of affect it as well. Then we move into the bicarbonate or Olson, Kelowna, then the modified Kelowna where tests were done. But they need to be proven to work here and reflect the soil conditions that we have here. So moving on from soil analysis, really quickly bringing up crop rotations. Again, what's the planned rotation? What are you trying to achieve with that production system? Is the goal realistic? And of course, considerations in our rotation are the impacts on past and future crops. Past crops contributing nitrogen, future crops, again, contributing nutrients to the next crop, or from a disease carryover point of view. Field assessment. This is, other than looking at the soil characteristics in the field, we're looking at where are our risk factors? What are the limitations to that field? You know, are we looking at trying to improve the organic matter? What was the past performance? What are the erosion risks? Is tillage an option or not? So that's really looking at the field and assessing, is this the best rotation? All that information can affect what you put in from a nutrient point of view, but it also, we want to look at what are our problems in that field. Is that field suitable for that rotation? Is that the best field for the rotation, or is that the best rotation for that field, I guess I want to say. Next up would be our equipment and staff, and this is sort of looking at equipment options. You know, this is, we often have limitations to get as much done as possible. So how we're doing it, a risk of loss, are there better ways of doing it? We got staffing limitations and workload? Is custom an option or neighbor borrowing? So this is about the timely application of nutrients, seeding, pesticides, etc. All of that goes to refining that rotation to take best advantage of the situation that you have. Quick step on nutrient sources, what's available, like what do you have for types of fertilizer available to you, and they're not the same everywhere. The biggest thing here, I guess I have to mention, is budget. What do you have for putting the nutrients on, making sure we have those minimums NP or PK and S, and maybe any micros, and then adjusting our nitrogen to be the most effective investment that we have. Of course, treatment options. If we are using nutrient sources for our application, are there options for my system to be putting on additives, inhibitors, coatings? Again, that's around nutrient loss, but how does that help the system? How can I optimize my investment to protect that nutrient so I don't lose it? And Matt, don't be scared to shut me off. I know I'm getting near the end, but you can pull a plug at any time. Scouting that field, and this is in-crop monitoring. This is really important from a health point of view, crop health point of view, responding to changing weather forecasts. And this is where we really begin to evaluate our plan and the production system, evaluating the crop, not just from a nutrient perspective, but from an overall perspective. For example, rocky fields and pulses don't always go together very well. So evaluating the field, this is our first step at determining if the rotation is the best approach for that location. And finally, this is where we start looking at harvest. We assess the crop, we look at our soil analysis again, we look at the effective of the management and the nutrients applied. So the soil testing really does two things for us. One of them, it's giving us an idea of the soil so we know what and how to crop and the fertilizer required and what improvements we can make to the medium on which we're growing. But it also, and especially over time by repeated sampling, it gives us an idea, are the management choices we're making improving the soil? Is organic matter going up? Is erodibility going down? Are nutrients accumulating lower in the soil profile, or are they staying quite high? And one of the things that we found lately with fertilizer is maybe pH changing in that top couple of inches compared to something at depth. So when you sample 6 inches, you may not see that difference compared to 0 to 3 and 3 to 6. That pH change might be at the surface because that's where we're putting all our fertilizer. and whether that's tilled in, because the soil does have a huge buffer capacity, or whether we need to be looking at liming. Those are the decisions we make moving into the next year. Briefly, just on a few tools, one of the ones we're most proud of is the Alberta Farm Fertilizer Information Recommendation Manager, a great tool for running scenarios on the farm, looking at different crop combinations or rotations and fertilizer applications, and this now includes manure applications. So it's a great tool to make decisions one way or the other of going with either a different crop in that field based on the soil test information available, or going with different fertilizer application options. Again, trying to target that 4R management, right rate, the right time, right method, and right source. Nutrient Management Planning Guide. Again, it's just a hard copy of nutrient management planning, goes through some of the details, brief understanding of everything in the soils that I discussed earlier. Soil Information Viewer is just a tool we use to help with mapping, but also gives you historic soils information and a little bit more information with the field. It shows you some of that differences in soil types within fields, and it allows you that background information to make some decisions on. Of course, some of our other tools around the Climate Information Service, soil quality scorecard allows you to evaluate the soil in the field. And we have a whole pile of risk assessment tools, starting with environmental farm plan, going through the phosphorus management and wintering site design, some risk screening tools, looking at nutrients and movement, and assessing risk from a runoff or accumulation point of view. And essentially, I was hoping to get across that nutrient management planning isn't linear. It sort of evolves as you develop more information and more experience. The plans get better. Having one, the most of the work is front loaded. You do it at the beginning and just sort of tweak as you go on. It's not just about the application rate. It's about assessing the field for risk, suitability for the rotation or cropping system, looking for options to address that risk, and of course, evaluating to ensure you're optimizing for profits and not just maximizing yields. And then the little thinking of contingency always allows for a faster response. There you go, Matt.
Nice, thanks, Trevor. I almost pulled the plug on you. It was this close. Just kidding.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sure a lot of people appreciate that. Oh, so I've been presenting just the top of my head the whole time.
Great. You know what? I was going to say something. It happened about like 5 minutes ago.
Fantastic. Okay.
Okay. Just a little bit of fun humor. Okay. Our next panelist, Mike Grettinger, will present on effect of biological products on the growth and yield performance of wheat, peas, and canola. Mike is the Farming Smarter Research Coordinator for the agronomy program and has been there since 2010. He coordinates protocols, seeding, spraying, data collection, pictures, harvest, and data processing for the agronomy small plot trials and demos, and bridges the research with the communications team. If he doesn't have the answers you're looking for, he's probably interested in building a research project around it. Back during his Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry, he worked in quality control for Black Velvet Distilleries, Maple Leaf Pork, and with University of Alberta, so cabbage seed pod weevil. And he had an overall passion for working and watching things grow. Mike currently lives in Lethbridge with his young family. Welcome, Mike.
Right. Thanks a lot. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, it's all good.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate actually the way this is structured and getting to follow Trevor as well, because I think it just kind of frames what I'm about to talk about, and there is a little bit of overlap there. And yeah, I think it'll just be really good. So yeah, we're talking plant pick-me-up. So they're talking biostimulants. And I was going to ask whether or not these are within that affirmed thing, and whether or not some of these biostimulants are included in those fertilizer recommendations or not. But maybe after my presentation, we'll have some compelling evidence for or against that, I suppose. So we ran a study from 2020 to 2022, funded by Alberta Wheat Commission, Canadian Agricultural Partnership, and we had this on site here in Lethbridge, just in the county, just on Highway 512 here at our Farming Smarter station. We also had trials in Battle River, as well as Falher, Alberta, so kind of covering the whole province. But I think just to start off, so I'm going to cover, what isn't a biostimulant, classifications of biostimulant. We'll get into those field trials, and if you've seen our presentation on this before, counts, vigor, biomass, all those things. But we do have some new yield info. because we just wrapped this up and submitted a final report in the springtime of 2023, as well as some interesting kind of economic side as well. And then, of course, kind of the buyer beware for different products and 4Rs slash kind of Cs. So we can't really start. We never tested the video, but can't really start if we don't know what is a biostimulant, right? Okay, so you get the idea. A biostimulant is something that it's just improving or speeding up a natural process that's happening. There's a lot of different ways that they can do this. They can go directly into the cells and have some sort of hormonal effect, or they can also interact with kind of the environment and do something in the environment like a symbiotic relationship that helps improve processes that are already in place. So, just to be clear, biostimulants aren't a fertilizer. We're not talking macro micronutrients, and they're not really PGRs, but the PGPs, plant growth promoters, can be considered a type of biostimulant. So there's a number of different classifications for biostimulants. So they fall into these seaweed extracts. So that's where we're basically getting direct plant hormones, the auxins, cytokinins, gibberellins, abscisic acids, and things like ethylene, things that naturally occur in plants. You're getting that, and those are kind of that hormone or seaweed extract classification. There's biologicals, so we're all probably familiar with inoculants, proving that symbiotic relationship. There's these fulvic and humic acids. You've got humic, like long chain carbon source, and fulvic acid, these shorter chain honey colored type things. There's also tannins and lipids and lignans and things like that. Protein hydrolysates, those are just specifically things that, water has been added within, and then they just have enzymes that help break them down faster. And then just a whole general range of plant extracts and specific extracts from other plant sources. So, just to go through, this is kind of a reverse pyramid. So on the left side here, we have the things that plants need for growth, or macros, or sorry, I guess on the left side, we have the things that humans need for growth here. Carbs, proteins, fats. On the right side, we have our macros. There should be an S there, got cut off, NPK type thing. Human side, so our micros would be like those vitamins and minerals. And for plants, we have these micronutrients, all sorts of different functions in the cell, obviously. And so where do biostimulants fit in? So these are like, oopsies, I put the wrong picture there on the right side, but my bad. Biostimulants are these things having that direct influence. They're not specific vitamins, minerals, nutrients, anything like that. They're having more of a play directly on the biochemistry of the cells in the plant. So, why do we care about all this? Well, when the market's kind of gone haywire, I guess, in the last 10 years, there were some changes to CFIA regulations. A whole bunch of products have been coming overseas. We don't know whether or not they work here, how well they work here. And so, from our perspective, we really want to do a good job of looking at things the way a farmer would, and evaluating how they can work, and what kinds of impacts biostimulants can have on our crops here in southern Alberta, and I guess across the rest of Alberta as well. So we came up with a study, is really, really interesting. And really what we wanted to do was we want to compare the effect of these whole range of products. What kind of impacts do they have? Obviously on yield, on economics, but just the other quality parameters. And then we were looking at, like, what are we going to do? So these objectives kind of come out of the study itself. So to generate recommendations for the use of biostimulants in wheat, peas, canola. So we did 3 crops and under 3 agroclimatic zones. So southern Alberta, central Alberta, and northern Alberta. But obviously, when we're talking about biostimulants, there's a number of challenges, and regionality is a big concern. So how do we manage our crops, and how do we kind of differentiate, especially when we're trying to look at the big picture here of how biostimulants might fit into our cropping system. There's also the whole protocol side. So, we came up with an application, we submitted everything, and because the market was just shifting so quickly, a year after this got funded, every company had different formulations. They had kind of gone back to how they were promoting things. Certain products we planned in one crop were now not available in that crop. And so it made for an interesting kind of dynamic. And what we ended up doing was really meeting with the sales reps, the agronomists, putting a plan together in place, and really just working on the trial as though we were a new customer or farmer. We looked at soil background, all those kinds of things. What would we recommend? Here's the common crops we wanted to grow. And so it was a really good process that way, I think, for the study. But again, another challenge of what are we going to check this against, and what are we comparing to? So, with something like a nitrogen study, it's easy to put a 0 check, run a yield curve, look at the economic side, and you can go 30, 60, 90, 120 pounds an acre, and you get a nice response curve. But with a suite of biostimulant products coming on the market, what are we even comparing to? What does a check look like? And how are we going to know what specific part of whatever's working? And so that's where it came down to this systemic versus reductionist approach. And so eventually we realized that, in a lot of cases, our other programs will test a very specific product under a specific circumstance. But what we wanted to achieve from our study here was, looking at the bigger picture. So if we're going to follow the recommendations of a sales agronomist and look at, what a farmer would typically be doing, we're going to have a couple of different checks. And so I'll share those with you when we get there. So Trevor had kind of pulled this up earlier, but this, law of the minimum and Wallace's law of the maximum. So we wanted to make sure in this study that, if we're going to test these and test them properly, that, nitrogen and water and those things aren't limiting. So we made a concerted effort to test the soil background in the beginning. We kind of made sure we had sufficient levels of all our fertilizer. In our case, the site in Lethbridge was irrigated, but the other two sites weren't. And so there's a couple of years where we had to get rid of the data just because of drought in like the Peace area. So the other side of it is, this Wallace's law of the maximum. Once we correct for these limiting factors, we expect these other effects to be magnified. And where things maybe gets a little confusing with a biostimulant is just that lots of times they're promoted as something for stress and dealing with stress factors. And so we don't necessarily need everything to get that magnification effect. But I think that in our case, that's where a lot of the producers are going for. So if you imagine, somewhere in southern Alberta, you've got a dryland farm, you're growing a crop that's maybe only going to get 20, 30 bushels an acre, chances are you're not spending the money on extra nitrogen or biostimulant products or anything like that. It's more than likely the high production areas, the chance where you have good yield potential, and that's where you're probably targeting a product like this from a farmer perspective. Well, that was a weird graphic. All right, so I mentioned fertility. So, oops. Go back here. We background tested, we applied to 100% fertility for good crop yields. That ended up being about 100 pounds an acre minimum, 10 to 35 pounds P2O5, depending on the location. Forestburg tended to be deficient in calcium or potassium, so they added that. And Fuller and Forestburg also put a little sulfur down as well. And so this is just an illustration of kind of how these small plot research trials work. So on the left there, we've got Farming Smarter, Battle River, and Sarda. So those are the 3 locations that we put the trial at. And then on the right-hand side, that's the 4 companies that we worked with. So we had ATP Nutrition, Stoller, Alpine, and Penergetic. And like I said, we don't want to get in trouble. We're not making sure not to badmouth anybody. We actually kept the treatments and protocols secret for kind of the duration of the trial. And, we're really trying to test things out and see where they worked and kind of find the fits. And we grew this on canola, peas, and wheat in that rotation. So this is an aerial shot of our first year of the study. And what you'll notice is I'm going to go into later in the fall. So this is the same thing. There's a block. We have a pointer here. These are replicated. So each of the 4 strips there is a replication of the different treatments. The very bottom left, so those are our wheat plots. And those are all the various treatments. And we kept them the same for the duration of the trial. So if I jump ahead to year 2, you'll see that bottom left, the wheat has changed to canola. And if you look again, bottom left, you'll see that canola is now changed to peas. And so this is a fully phased cycle. So we had all 3 crops, all 3 years. That just helps us do a better job of capturing any seasonal influences and environmental effects because we have the full phase of rotation there. And every single plot remained the same for all 3 years as well. So if we had a check plot in year 1, that was the same plot. We seeded right back into that same place in year 2 as a check plot. We seeded right back in that next place as year 3 as a check plot. And the reason we decided to do that was because, a farmer typically is going to feed, his rotation. And we wanted to see if there was any kind of additive effect from any of these products as well. So some of the things that we looked at was like a penergetic soil activator. So this is something that gets broadcast sprayed on before seeding. And then there's this seed treatment and foliar feed. So you can see in the middle there, just a light coating on all the seed. And here's an example of kind of, like I said, the complication of things we were up against. So this is our seed treatment chart for the various different crops. You can see, this is, I guess, where I can explain the difference between the 2 check treatments. So up at the top there, we have a traditional treatment. And what that came down to was we decided that traditional treatment would basically be the untreated check, you could call it. So it's got bare seed. We added just NPKs as whatever the soil tests were, and we didn't do anything else. So there was no fungicide applied on, there was no PGR, no seed treatment, anything like that. And then the advanced, we were kind of challenged because, we know in a lot of cases that farmers are going to use those things. And we didn't necessarily want to see a whole bunch of responses and not know whether or not that the basic things that a farmer might do might also be covered. So we called that an advanced check or an advanced treatment. And so the advanced check has, in the case of wheat, it's got a dual fungicide insecticide seed treatment on it. If we thought we needed fungicide across the whole trial, that was one that got fungicide. If we thought we needed a PGR in the wheat, for example, that got PGR. And it was just a little more advanced agronomy besides the basic untreated. So kind of same story for our in-crop application. So this is looking at our herbicide timing. So a lot of these products, ATP, Stoller, Alpine Penergetic, there's a tank mix factor. So we mix things, different products in at herbicide application, and also at fungicide application. Those are kind of the big 3 is the seed treatment, herbicide, and fungicide, but there was also some different specific products. There's an Excite product for canola for heat blasting that gets applied. I guess that's fungicide timing as well, or a PGR type treatment if necessary. So from that, we found a couple interesting things. There's obviously the very first year, I think we used Odyssey instead of Viper and had some product antagonism, a little bit of injury we noticed. The plots grow through that, but I'm not sure we kept our P data here on a couple of treatments because of that. So the first factor that we looked at was plant density. That's something that it should have been quite uniform, and I think for the most part it was. We did notice potentially traditional, you say traditional plus Alpine, but I think that's a little misnomer. The Alpine and ATP should actually say, well, they're traditional, but they do have if you go back, they do have the seed treatment on them as well. So Alpine and ATP had the commercial seed treatment from the advanced. So Whether or not that's coming from the advanced treatment with a commercial seed treatment, or whether that's the seed treatments themselves, is a little difficult to know. But you can see down at the very bottom, traditional Czech had the lowest plant counts. And these numbers indicate statistical significance. So, we're really only confident saying the Alpine did better than both the advanced Czech and the traditional Czech, but we're not certain that it's any better than the rest of the biological treatments. And so wheat was the only crop we saw that on. Numerically, it looked like there was some differences, but nothing that we're 100% confident about. Another thing we looked at was vigor. And so, vigor is French, meaning to be strong. What we're looking for is just visual improvements. You know that neighbor you've got with a nice bright green grass, or dark, vibrant green, very thick crop. Oftentimes we'll see with low vigor, it's just not as much pop to it. And you can just, it's just a visual rating to determine how good things look. So this was a picture from a field scale study. I'm not sure if you can really tell on the web, but the picture on the left, I believe, was treated with a biostimulant product, and on the right it wasn't. And you can see there's some gaps in some smaller plants on the right, and the stand wasn't quite as good. And it looks like if you got in up close, you'd see maybe a little bit bigger plants there, and that sort of thing. So, we took some ratings. This is for all 3 years, for all 3 sites, and the various crops. We did see again, this Alpine treatment looks like it maybe had a little bit better vigor rating. These are just observations, so there's no quantitative data here. So the one thing to note, I guess, as well, is that Alpine, one of the products, we're putting down Alpine G22 in furrow at seeding. So obviously, by having a little extra micronutrient and application at seeding is likely helping improve that vigor, as well as maybe the plant response. So we did a lot of digging in this trial, and we dug up plants, we dug up roots, we separated them, we washed them down, let them dry, took some various weights from both above and below ground, and got some really interesting things. So you can see we've got the peas in the top right, the wheat in the bottom right, and the canola in the bottom left. And we've got traditional starting on the far side, so that's untreated. These were taken back, I think, year 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4 is alphabetical, Alpine, ATP, Penergetic, and Stoller. And then advanced is that more commercial or more advanced farmer Czech. And in a lot of cases, we did see visual differences. It looked like, some of the products had a little bit of a boost on that root growth and development. And in a couple of different cases as well, that vigor effect, like we talked about a second ago. Well, I guess I goofed up my animation there, so we'll ignore that for a second. So this was just pictures we took in a commercial field, again, part of a more field scale study, not the small plot, but on the left is that untreated. On the right is the commercial only. We had commercial and Penergetic only. And I think, we just went out blindly. We walked through the field, we found a spot, we dug stuff up. It was not, hugely scientific. We didn't sample a million places, but just kind of going in, finding a spot, seeing what we see, and some interesting kind of visual improvements there. So there's what I was looking for, those circles. So this is the above ground and below ground biomass. So we did wheat, peas, and canola again. And we saw, again, in a couple cases, it looked like the peas, maybe the above ground biomass was improved. And in canola, we saw some improvements with a couple of those products as well. So here's where I think farmers care the most. They say those other qualities don't really pay the bills, right? And so what are we doing for time here? So this is the yield. This is where everybody wants to see. And what we have is every single column here is a different site and a different year. So LB 2020, that's Lethbridge 2020. And where we have the bold numbers, those are the yields. It doesn't say on there. I'm pretty sure that's kgs per hectare yield. And so I'm highlighting here kind of our worst performers. And so our traditional check, you know, in Flair 2020, the Stoller on peas wasn't as good. Forestburg 2020, that's in central Alberta. They had a couple, Alpine actually wasn't as good there. And then advanced traditional checks. So you're noticing lots of these lowest values are either these advanced or traditional checks, sorry, and then just getting rid of this data because it was such a bad drought year for those crops. Lethbridge, we had a couple of the biostimulants not doing as well as some of the others, and Falaire and Forestburg. So overall, you know, where we found significant differences, about 13 of our 27 total crop years for this study, which is about half, which is actually pretty significant. We weren't expecting that big of a result, I don't think. And, you know, if you look at this data again, if you look at Lethbridge 2020 and Lethbridge 2021, we only had one of our 6 years, or one of our 6 crop years there showing any effect. So I think, you know, from our perspective here in Southern Alberta, is a bit of surprising once we started putting the rest of all this data together overall and looking at, you know, maybe some of those future implications. And so, you know, this is just the opposite now. This is where we saw kind of all the best improvements. And so anytime there's a number in a letter, that's where we had a significant increase in yield. So we've got the advanced check, but ATP and Alpine in 2020, Stoller, Penergetic, ATP Alpine, Penergetic, Alpine ATP, Stoller. So we were kind of quite surprised. And I mean, this is ugly and it's awful to look at. So instead, we're going to jump ahead and kind of combine some of this data. Is this the one I want to show? No, this is the one I want to show. So I think this is maybe an easier way to look at all this data. And I've done this for our night spraying project as well. And so this is just kind of doing a metal count on where, or just overall, how some of these products and things performed. And so the ATP up at the top had basically, called it 5 gold medals, but that's where there's 5 individual of those 27 crop years where it was kind of the best performer compared to anything else. The advanced check had only 2, which was a little surprising. And the Alpine had five crop years where it did the best. Stoller and Penergetic, 3 where they were the best, but 5 and 3 where they were maybe on the lower end or matching with the lower end. And then that traditional check, that's our, you know, NPK only. Never once, which is actually really impressive, never once was it the best treatment anywhere, or even, I don't think, equivalent to the best treatment. And 5 times it was the worst, the absolute worst. So all those ones in the middle are just kind of showing the overlap. And it is one of the challenges of a study like this, is that, you know, differentiating such small differences in yield, a couple bushels here and there, can be a challenge. But overall, pretty impressed that there was some products that performed quite well. The one thing I wanted to point out too is those first 3 that all start with ATP, Advanced Check, and Alpine. Those were the ones that had a commercial seed treatment on them. So they had dual fungicide insecticide. For peas, they had, I think, Apron Max plus Cruiser 5F or something like that. And because of that, it's a little difficult to know whether or not those seed treatments were, how responsible they were for that improvement in, say, vigor and yield and biomass and all those kind of things we looked at. But compared to a system without, they're definitely doing a decent job. So I guess I just kind of wanted to wrap up with a little bit of maybe economics and looking at, you know, where these products might fit in for a producer. So for NPKS, Calculated 751 bucks a ton, and kind of figure out at 100 pounds an acre application rate, how much are you spending per acre on your nitrogen? We'll say $74.1 an acre. And then for your barley pricing, you know, a 100 pounds an acre should net you an extra 20 bushels an acre of barley. And so when we price it out at 748 a bushel, that's 150 an acre. So that's a 2-to-1 ROI. That's what I want to get at there. 2-to-1 ROI and putting N down for barley. We can do the same, all sorts of treatments for calculations for seed treatment, for fungicide, and what other inputs. So for biostimulants, in some cases, we're looking $10 to $30 an acre. And at crop prices like they were a couple of years ago, $10 to $20 a bushel, you only need a couple bushels an acre to see that net return. All right, so these charts came out of our final report, and this was looking at what we did was we totaled the specific products that we use for each of those trials and got a, you know, you may get a better deal depending on which retail you go to, but this is kind of a ballpark approximation. And this is per hectare. So these are going to be 2.5 times higher than my last slide there. So we're looking at 160, anywhere from 60 to upwards of $200 per hectare per product, depending on, you know, who your agronomist is and how fully into these different products you want to go. And when we plugged that in with our yield values, we've got our 3 locations, so Forestburg, Lethbridge, and Falher. And then we can look at the increase in yield. What's our potential increase in yield from that check? And we can get a market price and expected gross income. And so this was something that was just put in there in the springtime, and I haven't really presented on it at all. So I haven't gone through it as much as I'd like, but the expected gross income from additional yield per hectare varies. So for wheat and peas were the only 2 we presented, and that's because in that canola, we didn't find overall a big difference in yields regardless of the product we applied, but in wheat and peas we did see in different circumstances and different locations we saw that. So for Forestburg and wheat, $140 per hectare, and in Lethbridge 261, and then in peas all 3 locations actually showed potential improvement. Those aren't specific to any of those products, but they are looking at depending on the maximum yield. So this is kind of best case scenario, and I think that's where, you know, the little caveat at the bottom says that this is based on, you know, 10 and 20% yield improvements, and it varies year to year. And that's the other thing we really kind of noticed, is that in lots of cases we had a really big jump in one year, not in others, and there's a whole psychology and biases and things that we can look at when it comes to using these products, but that's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother day, I guess. If I have just 1 or 2 minutes left, I'll just kind of share this, you know, separating, you know, how do you know whether a product's good to use? Do they list their active ingredients? Do they have a % active? Do they telling you what's in the bottle essentially? And are they over promising? Are they realistic? There's a lot of companies that, you know, worked with us on this study that said, you know, what they do is if they will sell a product, if something doesn't work or doesn't give the return, you're going to get a credit the next year. There's different systems they have in place, and really the market, unfortunately, the market has to sort these things out. But if that's the case, then we've found that anybody out there selling snake oil doesn't tend to last nearly as long as those that have realistic expectations and that are kind of open and honest about how their products work and where they're going to work. So I guess I'll leave you with just, you know, this idea. Biostimulants aren't a one size fits all. Just, you know, looking all the way back through Trevor's presentation, you know, there's a whole host of different ways and applications and types. There's, you know, so we have the 4 R's where we're putting them with the right source, the right rate, right time, and right place. But I think there's a whole bunch more to add. So with biostimulants, we have these 4 C's that I just made up for fun, but they're based on this study. And are we putting them in the right crop? So we found, wheat and peas had a really strong response, but canola didn't. But oftentimes these work really well in horticulture and greenhouses and maybe various things like carrots and pumpkins and raspberries and all sorts of things where we see really strong responses. But you get out to a commercial canola field and it may not have the same translation. And then again, the right conditions. So are we putting these in a dryland area that's going to be drought prone, or are we under high yielding irrigation environment or even a greenhouse? And the right carrier. So are these soil applied? Are they going down with herbicide? Are we putting separate passes? There's all sorts of things that are going to influence the economics of using a product. And the right cost. So what is the risk management side of it? How much are you willing to spend on, a potential insurance thing, stress and risk mitigation side of things. So there's so much more I'd love to talk about. And if you have any questions, I look forward to that as well.
That was great. Thanks, Mike.
Hmm.
So we are running a little bit over, so we'll do a couple questions here, and I know a few of you are looking for those CEU credits too, so I'll get those up shortly. I just get question in the chat. So for you, Trevor, which of the pea extraction methods have been proven to local conditions of the prairies?
The most recent ones, like the Kelowna, which is a little bit older, the labs preferred or moved to modified Kelowna, which allowed them to extract both phosphorus and potassium. So those ones have been. Olson has been. We've moved away from things like Miller-Axley because it just wasn't as effective. So those are the ones. And just because Mike brought it up earlier in the presentation, affirm, no, we don't have any biostimulants in it yet. We just finished adding manure a year ago, and some of the new fertilizer products, like the inhibitors, have been added, but no biostimulants yet.
Nice. For you, Mike, are many Alberta producers using biostimulants, or are they currently limited to smaller scale producers?
Well, yeah, that's the reason we did this study was, back in 2012-ish, a whole bunch of these new products came to market. And I would say that there's quite a few using them. And why we did this study was because so many of them were asking us questions. And for very specific things, there's just a limit in what they can produce. There's a lot that are very specific to greenhouses, to other horticultural applications, and sometimes they're just limited. There's a specific product gets made out of waste at some site and they only have 200 tons a year that they produce, and that's the whole market penetration. The companies we were working with are pretty spread out across Western Canada, and I think they'd love for everybody to use them, right? And they definitely are using them on a field scale level. So we have producers in our area that are growing thousands of acres using these products. Essentially, some just seed treatment. Like I said, some are using entire packages, and some use them for a couple of years, don't like them. Some try them once, they work great, they use them forever. So there's a lot of interesting factors that go into that for sure.
Nice. For you, Trevor, our farm is heavy on special crops, and I have started taking our own soil samples. We grow potatoes, sweet corn, and pumpkins, and our landlords grow sugar beets and timothy. With the mixing of the soil in the 0 to 12-inch fraction, would there still be any advantage to the 0 to 6-inch and 6 to 12-inch, with the top 12-inch being mixed regularly when going into potatoes and then versus other crops?
That's a fantastically interesting question. Theoretically, there shouldn't be. If it's being mixed that well. Generally, though, unless rototiller, we're not getting a complete mix in our soils. It still looks like we're doing quite a bit. I really don't have a great answer on that. I still think there might be some value in 0 to 6, 6 to 12, but with that mixing, I can sure see the thinking behind that if we're getting a really good mixture I'm just not sure if we are. And I've never seen it, so anything delineating the two, I should say.
Yeah.
So, no great answer. No, I'm sorry.
Mike, regarding your trials, were your background rotation, that being the crops prior to the trial being planted, identical on all your treatments?
Well, the very first year before we started, I believe everything was wheat stubble. So we'd had a long-term rotation, 4 years, no trials or anything like that. It's kind of tricky because every time you start a rotational study, you're usually starting off one common ground, which would have been wheat. But then like I said, we did a fully phased rotation. So by planting wheat, peas, canola all at once, we were able to run that same 3-year rotation on the various places year after year. So the very first year, no, but every subsequent year, yes, we had the same rotation going at all 3 sites at all different kinds of stages or phases.
Another question I got for you, are some of these products that are better or easier options for growers to start with when they're looking to dip their toe in the biological or biostimulant world?
Yeah, I think so. There's definitely some that are going to require a very specific kind of application equipment, or some maybe, if you don't have a liquid kit, you're not going to be able to apply the liquid type products. But in a lot of cases, the ones we were working with, they had those 3 kind of really crazy charts with the seed treatment and the herbicide and the fungicide. In a lot of cases, we're just tank mixing their products, micronutrient product or biostimulant product in with herbicide, or we're mixing it in with a commercial seed treatment. So in our case, just taking a couple mils and putting it in with a seed treatment, mixing it up. So they should be relatively easy. I think that's obviously like the low hanging fruit for a lot of those companies, is if it's really difficult to get your product on, they're not going to make it very far. So they've definitely made it pretty easy for us. And that's where those big protocol changes came from too, is the first year we had all these things figured out. And I think that from the company's standpoint and I guess the retailer standpoint, they want to make it easy for farmers. So if you are growing a farmer somewhere growing 8 different crops, and you have this crazy regimen of everything, and you're out there every 3 days spraying something, and you never get a break, it's not going to work well logistically. And so they've moved to, kind of compromising in some cases. And instead of having 3 different products for all 3, wheat, peas, canola crops, they're just compromising, saying we're going to use product A because it kind of works decently on all of them, and we're just going to tank mix it at herbicide, even though we'd prefer you to do it 1 week after herbicide, for example, because it's just not realistic. And once you add those things into a farmer's logistical constraints, it's going to end up costing them more in the end.
Matt, I don't know if you noticed, I just wanted to point out Dale Steele had a great comment in the web chat in response to that soil sampling, and he's completely right. The organic matter is usually in the top, and I don't think we get a good enough blend to say it ever gets down to the 6 to 12. So just wanted to note that for anybody that wasn't watching, Dale.
No, for sure. And I was going to mention that too, so that's good. Okay, last question. Trevor, is there a link to where we might be able to view the many resources you listed at the end of your presentation? Yes,
I can get that to Matt, the presentation in PDF with all the links in it.
Yeah, we can do that, and then we can fan out to everybody that signed up. So, no, that's awesome. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Special thanks to Trevor and Mike for taking the time to present to all of us here today. Both really good presentations, so I would like to say my thanks to you guys both. And then for next week, please join us next Monday, February 12th at 11, where Graham Gilchrist from Biological Carbon Canada will present on Carbon School. Thanks, everybody. Till next time.